Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. This is a Spawn daily episode, so apologies. I got the order a little bit mixed up. So today, this is going to be Medieval Spawn and Witchblade. Previously, 2 days ago, the episode was Medieval Spawn Witchblade. It doesn't have the "and." So the first Medieval Spawn Witchblade story came out in 1996. The second one, it's actually a different Medieval Spawn, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the second one by Brian Haberlin, doing the writing and the art, came out in 2018. So still a great story. I wanted to put them out back to back, but he's had some technical difficulties with OBS. Hopefully my voice sounds better than it did previously. And I know this stuff sounds better than the episodes we're re-releasing that we originally had recorded in 2022. So anyway, apologies. I wanted to get something out every day, so I did put out issue 44, which is kind of a standalone issue, yesterday. So still getting out an episode every day, but Medieval Spawn and Witchblade today. And a reminder, in case anybody's wondering, like, what the heck is Spawn Daily? So this all spurred out of the 30th anniversary of Spawn back in 2022, like I said, when the original episodes were released. And it has to do with wanting to get caught up with Spawn, wanting to read Spawn in its entirety so that I could read the new books that were coming out, because they seemed so interesting to me. Gunslinger Spawn, King Spawn, Scorched, and then the regular Spawn series as well. And so I bought those issues when they came out. And what I found was there was a lot of things that happened with Spawn, a lot of things that were mentioned in those issues that I didn't have context for because I'd never read the original Spawn. So we decided, hey, that's about, at the time, a little over 300 issues, 320 issues, 365 days in a year, 2022. Hey, let's celebrate the 30th anniversary of Spawn by reading and talking about one issue of Spawn every day. And then what I found out, as we probably got maybe 20 or 30 issues in, that the tie-ins and the appearances of Spawn in other books were so important, and they were referenced in the main book so much, kind of like early Marvel, where you didn't have to have it, but it just added to the richness of the story so much. So after we hit issue 50, I went back. I found a different reading order put together by a gentleman named Blake Whitlow, who even joined me for a few episodes for a little while. But his reading order had everything in a chronological fashion, not necessarily in a publishing order, but just in an order that really made sense to read in order. So we went back, we backfilled, and read all the early crossovers, and then going forward after issue 50, we kind of read everything in the same order that was on the reading order. So we're approaching 50 now. I'm releasing these in the order of the Blake's reading order for the most part. There's a few here or there that I'm moving around for logistical reasons. Never where it won't make sense, but that's what we're doing. We're celebrating Spawn by checking out, the whole entirety of Spawn, and it's a good time to do it because this year there's a ton more Spawn content coming out. I think 10 different Spawn series were announced at New York Comic Con in October. There's a new Kickstarter for what Todd calls his most detailed action figure ever. Todd came on and talked about a lot of this stuff. There's also hopefully some news on when the movie's going to start shooting and what the release date's going to be for the movie. So there's a lot of Spawn content this year. Perfect time to dive back in. I've wanted to dive back in. I still want to complete this project, Daily Spawn, get caught up. But I've just been struggling to find somebody who will join me, partly because people just can't commit to recording a podcast every day. Now, I don't necessarily record every day. I like to get, record 2 or 3 in a day, and then I can be a little bit ahead, skip a day of recording. But that's a little inside baseball. You guys probably don't need to know that. But it is challenging, right? It is a commitment. So far, it hasn't been too tough because I'm re-releasing stuff that's already been recorded. But I've just ran into so many problems with the sound on my audio program I used to record actually yesterday. So again, apologies for having to stick Spawn 44 where I would not have chosen to put it. But again, not a big deal to have the two Spawn Witchblade series broken up. So let's go ahead and dive into issue number 1 of Spawn Witchblade. You see the cover there, giving credit to Todd McFarlane as the creator of Spawn. But as I mentioned, the story and the art both by Brian Haberlin and then Brian Holguin assist on the story. We have colors by Geirrod VanDYKE, letters by Francis Takenaga, I think is how you say it, and programming David Pence. You might wonder what the heck programming. Well, Brian Haberlin works a lot digitally. So this is 2018, so before AI was really a thing and was something that people were using in comics. So not to worry about that, but Brian Haberlin does have a background in computers, digital art, that sort of thing. So you can see that, or at least I notice it, looking at digital art when we get into the book. It has very much a different look than what you might see in a traditional comic where art was done in a traditional way. Even art that's done digitally, this looks a little bit different from that. There's kind of a slickness to it. I don't know that I like it because I feel like it loses a little bit of texture, but the art's very good, especially in terms of visual storytelling. So it starts off, we see this ragtag band of medieval people, farmers and what have you, and the voiceover is telling us that they're not soldiers. They are ragtag. They're using their whatever weapons they can lay hands on, scythes and clubs and rocks and whatever, to fight the darkness because they have no choice. We see them, and there's very young boys that are fighting as well, and there's talk of, hey, he's too young to fight. It's like, hey, if all of us are killed, if all of us are overrun, then what's too young? Like, everybody's going to have to pull their weight, right? There's always an excuse. So-and-so's too broken, and this guy's too old, and I'm too blind, and he's too young, and whatever. There's always an excuse. But again, if we don't fight, we're not going to be around. So they're fighting what looks to be like these zombie-like creatures. In the first medieval Spawn, Witchblade, the villain was the darkness. There's talk of darkness, and we hear darkness has spread across the land, and these monsters from, the dark, what have you. But it's not the darkness, quote unquote, like the top cow figure, as it were, or character. Excuse me. So we see them fight. We see them stab. It's a brutal scene. This guy stabs one of these zombies, through it. He's like, hey, we can win this fight. And the zombie, it doesn't kill him, right? Swipes his head off. Brutal in that bottom panel there. And that's when the forces kind of break and run. One of the young kids, one of the kids is probably too young to be fighting, turns to run and trips over another kid who is killed. They're just outnumbered. They're outnumbered. They're outgunned. They're not soldiers. And as their ranks break, we see somebody comes to save them, as it were. And so I think this is supposed to be a horn sounding. Doesn't really make a heck of a lot of sense. But we do see here a close-up of Spawn's eye, but armored, right? So very familiar medieval Spawn. It's going to look familiar to you. So double page, or a full page rather, splash, and we see that medieval Spawn is there. He's able to vanquish the forces of darkness, who they probably could have put up a pretty decent fight, but they're just so surprised by his appearance. And after he vanquishes them, this young boy that we saw that was ready to break and run says the king has returned. And king, what are you talking about? Medieval Spawn is not a king, at least as far as we know. But we'll get back to that in a second. Scene shifts. We're told that one of the crows that was there in the battlefield has to resist its natural instinct to go and beat off the carrion left from the battlefield, dead bodies and whatnot. It's called back to its home. And so we see it fly back to this castle. There's this woman, and she's wearing a crown of what looks like feathers, actually, and she talks about it returning, and, hey, what happened during the battle? Were my forces successful? Let me see what you saw. And she sticks her thumbs into the bird's eye, which is just really brutal. Totally brutal when you look at it. And she's able to see what the bird saw, including medieval Spawn. She goes, curious or interesting that they found a champion. She may have to use her own champion, which she calls out. And it's Scourge, who is a character that in the reading order we haven't seen, but I know is a character in Spawn in modern times. So apparently this is a medieval version. And she talks about Scourge being loyal to her and faithful to her because Scourge loved her so much in his previous life before she took his soul, whatever that means. So again, this woman seems very heartless, very cold, and it's kind of illustrated or the point is kind of emphasized when she steps on the crow, seemingly oblivious to the fact that it gave its life for her. So meanwhile, back on the battlefield, this young kid is explaining to medieval Spawn that he has this sword Peacebringer, which was the sword of the previous king, King Varan, so it must be King Varan returned. And Spawn's like, is that who I am? Is that, he just doesn't have the memories of it. And the squire asks him, or the boy asks to be his squire and asks him to take off his helmet so they can see that he is King Varan. He takes off his helmet and he looks like a hellspawn, right? He looks brutal, and the soldiers are taken aback, and the kid's like, hey, maybe you better put your helmet back on. So meanwhile, the soldiers, or the fighters, again, they're not soldiers, return. The young woman here is very distraught that her son, this is the one that the squire tripped over, had died in battle, but they have renewed hope because their king has returned. So the lore keeper of the village is the person who kind of tells the stories and kind of keeps the history of the village, talks about King Varan, who King Varan was, to remind everybody. Maybe there's people here that weren't alive when King Varan was around. Mostly it just helps us to understand. So we're told about King Varan, who, unlike his father, was willing to fight for his people. And so eventually they removed his father from the throne and put him on the throne because he would go out and fight for his people against marauders and what have you and keep them safe. And once he became king, then they wanted him to marry, and there was various tribes, and they all put forth people, women, for Varan to marry. Varan was very canny. Like he was worried it was going to cause conflict between the tribes if he chose one woman over another from a certain tribe. So he ends up finding this woman, Riel, who very mysteriously appears one night. He's very smitten with her, falls in love. And everybody's kind of happy. The king's happy. But Riel is very weird, very different. Whispers that she goes out in the woods at night and dances naked, and other strange behaviors that she has. There's also rumors that maybe she is having an inappropriate relationship with the king's best friend, Leia. But for the most part, people are happy, and when there's an attack from marauders in the north, the king goes to defend, even though Riel doesn't want him to, and she tells Leia, hey, when you go, you have to make sure that he comes back. I'm charging you with protecting him. Unfortunately, the king is slain. Leia comes back. We're told that the queen, in her despair, closes the castle gates, and she's never to be seen again. So that's the story as relayed by the lore keeper of King Varan. And unfortunately, upon his death, that's when the forces of darkness rise. They kind of take over the land, and that leaves the land as we see it now. So King Spawn, or I should say medieval Spawn, he's listening to this as well, that the lore keeper's saying, and he's saying, yes, Laeth, I remember, Riel, I remember, yes, I guess this was my kingdom. These are my people, but it doesn't look like what I remember it looking like. And we get this interesting page here where he's looking down at the wasteland of his kingdom, but in the panel right below that, there's a lot of vegetation, everything is lush, and what have you. And so he kind of rides out, he's taking a survey of the land, and he comes across this place where there was a village previously, a village that he had stayed at that had showed him and his troops hospitality, and he feels guilty. He wasn't able to protect them. He wasn't there, and so he vows to drive the darkness from the land. Meanwhile, the squire has gone out, and he is recruiting people to come and fight now that the king has returned. And he gives a very inspiring speech, and he's actually able to recruit quite a few people. Meanwhile, King Varan, or medieval Spawn, as he's out riding around, comes across this almost like Stonehenge-like place where he sees somebody dancing. It reminds him of Riel, and he wants to know who it is, and it turns out it's these, I guess for lack of a better term, witches. She calls herself Lady Guanin, and she talks about the world of Earth not really being their concern, except they're letting the darkness go unchecked, and it's spilling over into their world, and so they need to stop it, or Lady Gwennon is going to stop it, her and her compatriots, and they're not going to be discriminating when it comes to how they stop it. You know, kind of a veiled threat, like either you handle the forces of darkness, or I'm just going to wipe out everybody here, good, bad, indifferent. So we're also introduced to a little girl who has the power to apparently affect nature. Kildare is her name. Again, I think it's a character that we see later in Spawn, but we just haven't gotten there. But she's new to Earth, apparently relatively new in her power. She asks, "Well, what is this unhappy place?" And I say, "Oh, it's called Earth." So Varen has vowed to, again, vanquish the forces of darkness. He convinces the Lady Gwennon and her compatriots to leave, and says he'll take care of it, and he rides off. He finds his squire, and his squire mentions that he's a king once again. And he's like, I don't feel like a king, because a king should have a realm and a throne and a crown, and I have an army, and I have none of those things. And the squire says, well, you got to start somewhere, and you do, in fact, have an army. And he shows him all the people that he's recruited to battle the forces of darkness alongside King Baran. So that's the first issue. There's a complexity to the story. It's not a super simple story like the first one was, which ended up feeling a little bit choppy at times, but pretty interesting. So we go on to the second story. Same creative team: Brian Haberlin and Holguin on story, Brian Haberlin on art, Geirrod VanDYKE on colors, letters by Francis Takenaga, programming David Penez. And this issue starts off, and we actually see the bearer of the Witchblade fighting against forces of darkness. She's not given a name, but she is fighting against them before she is unfortunately taken out and killed. And it's interesting. I like what Haberlin and Holguin do here, because they talk about how, as a fighter, you can fight thousands of fights and be victorious and be a great fighter. But when it's a fight where you're risking your life, you can only afford to lose once. You can only afford one mistake. And then you're dead. And so that's what we see here. This bearer of the Witchblade is killed, falls into the sea. Witchblade falls into the sea as well. And then we flash forward, which is interesting, right? Because we're already in the past, but then we're told many years later. We see a couple of ships. They almost run into each other. One of the people on the ship yells at the one-man ship and says, "Hey, what are you, blind?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am," which is good because that I don't have to look at your ugly face. And he goes, "But there's nothing wrong with my nose. I can smell the taverns and brothels of Bleak Haven," which is where he's headed. So once he gets on shore, he's casting bones or stones or doing some kind of divination to try to find the future. We don't know who this guy is at this point. All we know is his name is, do we know his name is Seahawk at this point? His name is Seahawk. I don't know if we actually know at this point. But it's interesting, while he's trying to predict the future with, this arcane ritual of his, somebody walks by and thinks he's a beggar, I guess because he's blind. He has a walking stick and tosses a penny in his bowl. And he's like, "Get out of here. What are you doing? Now I got to start all over." So he is able to tell the future, to get some information, to figure out where he's supposed to go. And what we're told he is he's someone who looks for the artifacts. And so we see that he's being instructed to go find the Witchblade, to go find where it is and get it to its rightful bearer, whoever is supposed to wear the Witchblade next. I'm sorry. So he also sees that there's a new champion that has come. And obviously, that's Medieval Spawn. And then we see that the Witchblade and Medieval Spawn together are supposed to vanquish this darkness. We see a picture of that woman with the feather crown, if you will. So then we flash over to a house where we see a young girl and a bird, and they're stealing bread from a woman. And we come to understand that this is supposed to be the bearer of the Witchblade. And Seahawk finds this interesting. He's like, oh, she's a thief, huh? Well, you know, you do what you can to survive. I guess with what she needs to do, it'll be a useful skill. Let me go ahead and go find her. And he actually transports. He like disappears in a flash of light, and appears next to her in a forest where she's sitting with eating the bread that she just stole along with the bird. And right away, this little girl is suspicious of him and says, "Hey, look behind you," and then tries to run off. And he says, "Is that supposed to be a joke? Like and no disrespect, telling a blind man to look behind him." And she's like, "Man, I'm just trying to run away from you. And you know, if you're blind, you'll never catch me." And he says, "Well, he teleports from behind her to right in front of her. She runs right into him, and he says, I don't need to catch you when you're running right to me." And she's like, "How did you do that?" And so that's how Starling and Seahawk meet. So meanwhile, the evil queen is trying to get information on who King Baron is, or who this champion is that has shown up, and she wants information about the Witchblade as well. It's clear that she's aware of the Witchblade and she wants its power for herself. One of the women gives in, betrays her village in the hopes of saving her own life. She's not successful. The woman kills them anyway after saying they don't know anything about the Witchblade, but they do believe it is King Baron that has returned. And the rumors are that there's some girl named Starling who is supposed to be the next bearer of the Witchblade, because her mother, and that's the red-headed woman we saw fighting at the beginning of the issue, her mother was a member of that village. But when she died, Starling disappeared. Nobody really knows where she is, but she's the one that's destined to carry the Witchblade. So, again, the evil queen says, "Hey, thanks for betraying everybody," and she kills them all. So, again, showing her inability to have any sort of compassion or mercy whatsoever. So she wants to find Starling. She creates this, I don't know, monster-looking thing. It's got a bunch of tentacles. It can fly, and sends it off to find Starling and fetch her the Witchblade. Next up, we switch back to Seahawk and Starling. They're on a ship. We know when Starling's mother died, she fell into the ocean, fell into the sea. So, and when Seahawk had the vision, that's where he saw the Witchblade to be, somewhere in the water. So there's some back and forth between Seahawk and Starling. She doesn't know how to swim. He's like, "Don't worry about it. Everybody knows how to swim. You swam, and your mother, before you were even born, you'll remember." But Seahawk's also trying to convince her that she's destined for great things. And she's like, I don't feel like I'm destined for great things. And he says, "We got here to the ship by me waving my hand, and they teleported, right? And we traveled here in an instant, and you didn't even say anything about it." And Starling's response is, "Well, because that seemed like that's how it should be." He said, "See, you're not normal. You are part of this supernatural world." So as they're searching for the Witchblade, as they're on the ship, that monster, that demon or messenger, or whatever the heck you want to call it, that the evil queen created, finds them, knocks Starling overboard, and the Seahawk is able to fight him off using his abilities. And the queen is surprised. She's like, "Man, he's got a lot more power, than I thought." And the Seahawk he's very surprised that the evil queen is able to track. He's like, "I've been using all these cloaking spells. How are you able to track?" It's like, "Oh, the queen's interesting, kind of a villain soliloquy here, giving away the secrets." But she says, "Well, yeah, you're cloaked. I can't track you, but Starling, she shows up, bright, and I can track her wherever she goes." So Seahawk says, "Well, I don't really have time, as it were, to worry about this. I need to go and save Starling, because again, she mentioned that she couldn't swim, she's knocked overboard, what have you." So he dives in the water after her as she's sinking, but I don't know, pretty coincidental. Maybe it's just the Witchblade sensed that she was going to be there, or some destiny, or whatever however you want to put it. But as she's falling, as she's drowning, she senses the Witchblade. The Witchblade is right there, next to her and attaches itself to her. And as the Seahawk grabs her, she has the power of the Witchblade and is able to fly back up onto the ship. And she's starting to understand who she is and just how big of a story this is, how big of an adventure, epic adventure, to the point where she's overwhelmed and she passes out in Seahawk's arms. And he says, "You're safe now, or as safe as any of us can be." So meanwhile, at the camp of Medieval Spawn, we see that Scourge has arrived there to take out Medieval Spawn, takes out the sentry with just a wave of his hand, and the other soldiers are about to attack him, and Spawn says, "No, stay back, he's mine. He's challenged me." Obviously, he wants to keep his soldiers safe. If he's going to risk anybody's life, it's going to be his own, whatever that means, as an undead hellspawn. So as Scourge and Medieval Spawn are about to attack each other, that's where issue 2 ends. So we get to issue 3, same creative team. We see the battle is joined between Medieval Spawn and Scourge. The Queen is looking on with her powers of second sight, and with one blow, Medieval Spawn appears to be defeated. And so Scourge prepares to destroy the rest of his soldiers. When Medieval Spawn gets up, says, "Hey, I'm not defeated. Won't let you attack my lands. Prepare to die." And there's a little bit more of a fight between the two, a little bit more back and forth, and it looks like Medieval Spawn actually has the upper hand and tells Scourge to yield. It's like, why would I yield? I've killed thousands in my years. And as Scourge is there on the ground, Medieval Spawn notices the pendant around his neck, and it looks familiar to him. He's like, "Who is this Scourge? Is it somebody that I might know?" The name Lieth comes up. The name King Baron comes up. And the Queen says, "I've seen enough. Scourge, return to me." And Scourge is disappointed, like, "Wait, what? Why would you want me to return? Let me kill this guy." But he does as he's bidden, and he leaves. And then Spawn has a conversation with his squire, wondering, who is this Scourge? Who is this evil Queen? The answers may be found in his old Castle Baron. So that's their goal, to get into the castle and get some answers. And his squire's like, "Evil Queen is in the castle. Like, we got to go through the darkest places in order to get there. Places plagued by monsters." And Medieval Spawn says, "We have to go." And he wants to find Riel as well. Maybe she's found some way to keep herself safe all these years. A little wishful thinking on his part, but clearly he cares about this Riel still and wants to see if she's okay. So while they're traveling, the woods themselves come alive. The trees attack them. Doesn't go well, obviously, and Medieval Spawn saves as many as he can, but it's too dangerous, he feels like. So he says, "I'm going to continue on alone to the castle. You guys go back." He doesn't want to risk the lives of any of his subjects. The squire won't go back. He says, "No, my place is at your side." So credit him for his bravery. But then when he is actually attacked, he does kind of run and hide, overcome by fear. But he's learning, he's growing as a kid, and we're told that that'll be the last time he's surprised by his fear. Not the last time he's afraid, but the last time he'll be surprised by his fear. Meanwhile, back on the ship, now that Starling and Seahawk have found the Witchblade, they're heading to the same place, Castle Baron, to help dispel the darkness that's in the land. So Starling and Seahawk arrive at the, I guess we'll call it the Kingdom of Valen. But it's interesting because Seahawk, although he knows they're supposed to go to this castle and defeat this evil queen and vanquish force of darkness or what have you, doesn't know exactly, like he's got to sit there and figure it out, right? Like he's got to access his visions or what have you. But Starling just takes off and goes. And he's like, how do you know which way to go? I haven't even told you which path to take yet. And he's like, no, this is the way. And Seahawk's like taken aback. Are you sure? Yeah, I can feel exactly where I'm going. Basically, the Witchblade is leading her. And sure enough, it's not very long before they see the castle in the distance. And Starling's saying, yeah, this gauntlet, this Witchblade, it seems to speak to me. It's telling me to search the castle. And she's complaining about the fog and, you know, injecting a little humor here. The Bryans are like having Seahawk say, fog? What fog? And then Razorbeak shows up, Starling's little pet bird. He's squawking, like, hey, what's going on? What are you trying to tell us? Well, they're trying to tell you that the forces of darkness are there, like all these giant monsters that guard the castle, and now they have to battle, and although they're formidable, right, especially with the ability to teleport that Seahawk has, he's got to be able to concentrate. He's got to be able to, say his spells, and we'll also learn there's another part to his magic as well. And Starling, although the Witchblade's very powerful, she just got it. So they decide to take shelter. They notice a church off in the distance, so they run that way. They find a stairway that leads down to a crypt. They're trying to hide that way, but what they find is maybe due to the dark magic that's going on, the crypt is not safe either. Not only do they have the monsters chasing them that are trying to get into the crypt, but the dead that are in the crypt are restless dead. They're attacking them as well. And this is where we learn about what Seahawk needs to use his magic, right? There's no other way out other than the way they came down. That's where the monsters are coming from. And Starling's saying, we need a way out. And Seahawk says, okay, well, let me clear my mind. Let me focus. There's not really a way to focus with everything that's going on. But there's another part to it. Right, so as the dead are rising and attacking them and what have you, Starling, a little bit heroically, I guess you'd say, especially for someone so young and obviously new to the Witchblade, saying, I'll hold them off, old man, you make a run for it, because they do discover another passage which may lead to the surface. And that's where we learn about Seahawk's karma. He says, you're right, the choices I've been making lately have been a little bit selfish, and it's harming my karma. That's bad for my powers. And Starling's never even heard of karma. She's like, karma? What's that? And he said, it's complicated. If I show cowardice by running, my powers are actually going to diminish even more. But if I stay and fight and allow you to save yourself, then karma's going to swing back in my favor. I'll be more powerful again. And Starling's like, well, that doesn't sound like any magic I've ever heard of. Seahawk doesn't want to argue, right? He's like, I don't care. Just go. You got to get out of here. And sure enough, as she runs and he's making the sacrifice, he becomes more powerful. And he's able to fight off the undead as well as some of the monsters that were chasing them. And literally, you see in this panel here in the middle of the page where he kind of explodes the heads of all of these monsters. And he's got to pat himself on the back like, hey, dude, you need to chill, because, again, your magic is partly due to karma, but he pats himself on the back and says, you still got it, you Seahawk, you old devil. And meanwhile, as Starling's running through the passageway, she comes across all these spores and inhales them, and we see it affects her. She's having kind of hallucinations as she heads outside. She thinks that she sees her mother, her grandmother, her ancestors, basically, the people that have wielded the Witchblade before her. But we can tell as the reader right away that this is not really who they purport to be, because they're talking about how evil men are. Like, look at our ancestors, look at the people who have wielded the Witchblade before. These are all your mothers, and they've all died at the hands of men, and they show them crucified and burned at the stake and imprisoned and what have you. And they're saying, yeah, all men are evil. Whoever wields the power needs to, defeat all men, destroy all men, kill all men. So, although these are horrible things that, and some of them may be true, that the bearers of the Witchblade have gone through before, you can't paint it with that broad brush, right? That all men are evil and what have you. So, is this the darkness of the land affecting Starling? Is it those spores? Is it a combination of the two? Well, it's probably a combination of the two, right? I mean, these are spores which are hallucinogenic, and they might have made Starling feel a little out of it to begin with, but you add in the kind of the darkness that seeped into the land, and even these spores themselves are kind of evil. So they're imploring Starling to follow their will and saying, don't ask questions. When you come across a man, strike first and without mercy. And as she's finishing up this vision, who shows up but the squire and King Varin? And just as they bade her, as soon as she sees them, Starling attacks. And they're like, whoa, hold on, like, what's going on? Who are you? Why are you attacking us? And, they had greeted her like, hey, who are you? Can we help you? Do you need help? And Starling says, I won't be fooled by your kind words. And she's keeping up the attack. She says, I'm the bearer of the Witchblade. And she actually looks like she has King Varin there at her mercy, right? Like she's standing above him. He's laying on the ground. He's probably a little reluctant to attack a child. So that's how the third issue ends. We get to the fourth and final issue here. Again, same creative team. Brian Haberlin and Brian Holguin, the Bryans, doing the story. Script by Brian Haberlin, colors by Geirrod VanDYKE, letters by Francis Takenaga. So as this issue starts, we actually start in present-day New York. And we see a couple of people, one of them named Adam, not sure who that is, and Kildare is the other. Kildare, who we saw in the first issue, kind of that young witch or fairy, if you will, the one that had the ability to make a tree blossom just by touching it. And they've waited centuries for this moment. Adam's being pretty impatient, and Kildare's saying, we waited centuries, wait a few more minutes. They say, well, if he comes at all, I have my doubts that this is the time that he's actually going to come. I guess we'll have to wait and see. And he's looking at some ad for a Smithsonian, but accepting a rare manuscript. And there's like this medieval drawing there. So no idea who they're waiting for, but I guess, we'll have to wait and see. So kind of interesting, like all along it's been all set in medieval times, and all of a sudden, at the end of the fourth issue, we jump ahead to the present day. It's like, wait, what's going on? So as we left off last issue, Starling had attacked the Squire and King Varin, and even though the Squire is no match for the Witchblade, he does try to defend his liege, and he manages to sneak up on Starling and crack her in the back of the head, kind of knock her out. Meanwhile, her bird, Razorbeak, is flying around and attacking him. He's like, damn bird, it's taking a swat at it, what have you. And as all this is happening, Seahawk shows up. He's like, what's going on here? What the heck? And the Squire's like, this stupid bird's trying to pick my eyes out. This woman attacked me. And, Seahawk took the same path that Starling did. So he's aware of the spores. He says he probably inhaled these toxic spores. They poison your mind. Use your ability, call on the Witchblade. You know the truth. Look inside yourself, recognize what's foreign, and expel it. And sure enough, she's able to do that and vomits out the spores. So then our two bands of adventurers compare notes, and Starling's explaining her vision. She said, yeah, I saw these women. It seemed so real. They said I couldn't trust any men. I saw 3 women, 3 queens. And King Varin's like, 3? We only know of 1 evil queen. And Seahawk says, well, I've seen these queens in my dream as well. I fight for righteous. She's the bearer of the Witchblade. What cause do you serve? And they say, well, he's I think I've been saying Varin. It's Valen, High King of the Northlands. And he's fighting against the forces of darkness. And Seahawk's like, I sense that your mind is clouded. You're uncertain if you're actually this King Valen or not. But would you join us? We journey south to the castle as well. And King Valen's medieval spawn says, what, south? The castle's to the north. Like, what are you talking about? So apparently all is not as it seems in terms of where this castle is. I'm sure it's the evil queen manipulating people's perceptions to keep herself safe, right? Just another way to safeguard herself. And Seahawk says, yes, something's amiss. You sense it in the north. I sense it in the south. Let me see if I can clear my senses and find out where it really is. And as he's doing that, the castle appears above them, floating. So apparently, not only can she disguise where it is and make people believe it's somewhere it's not. It can actually move. It's flying through the sky. So the queens then show up, and we see that it is actually 3 queens, but they're all the same. And it's kind of a play on the Catholic Trinity. Instead of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, it's Mother, Daughter, Unholy Spirit. And we see their different iterations here. So we have the Mother, who's the evil queen that we've seen throughout with the giant crown of feathers. We see the daughter aspect of her, which my understanding is just one big evil spirit, right, that has divided itself into 3 when needed. So again, we have the queen, sorceress, and what have you. We have the daughter, who's actually Riel. So we know that she bewitched Valen back in the day to get him to marry him. Then we have the unholy spirit that looks to be kind of the darkness that has infected the land. So there's some back and forth here. Valen's trying to talk to Riel, saying, Riel, yours have been kind to you, as beautiful as ever. She's not having it. She's like, you're not King Valen, even though you carry his sword, Peacemaker. And the squire's arguing with her. Oh, this is indeed the king. You'll learn to your eternal sorrow. And Riel says, no, it can't be the king because this is the king. And she pulls out the scourge. Like the scourge is there. And the evil queen sorceress says, yeah, we changed him. Look at the pendant around his neck. We changed him. Even in death, he was bound to us. He crawled. It took him 7 years to crawl back from the battlefield after he'd been killed, and then we, took his soul and transformed him into the scourge. And so medieval Spawn's like, well, if that's true, then who am I? All along, he's believed that he's King Valen, and Scourge is the one that answers. Actually, he says, "You're the betrayer. Supposedly, you're my friend. You are Lieth, but you stole my bride." And as he says this, as Scourge says this, Lieth remembers. He's like, "Oh my God, you're right. The veil's lifting. Riel enchanted me as well, and had me make love to her beneath the stars." And Riel says, "Well, if you're Lieth, show your face." And he takes off the helm, and he's all jacked up, as most hellspawns are. And Riel is a little gentle with him for being evil, She's like, it is you, the 2 most handsome men that I, manipulated and what have you. So you feel bad for King Valen, having been turned into the Scourge. You also feel bad for Lieth. I mean, these guys were best friends. But, enchanted and bewitched by this evil woman, this evil sorceress, to the point where Lieth betrayed. And he says, "Can you ever forgive me?" That's what Lieth says. And he's like, for stealing my wife, maybe. But for killing me, never. So it wasn't even, that wasn't even the worst part. Like, Lieth stealing his wife wasn't even the worst part. While they were battling, it was Lieth that was, under this spell that actually backstabbed his king, and then took the sword and rode back to Riel. And as the Scourge is recounting this, as King Valen's recounting this, Lieth says, I remember it's all true, but once I returned, I didn't claim my prize. I realized what I had done. I saw Riel for what she was, not 1 but 3, and that aspect of her, Riel, was the most human. But I was so distraught. He was so distraught that he tried to kill himself. He jumped out of one of the windows of the castle with the sword Peacebringer. But rather than dying, rather than falling to the cobblestones, the ground opened up, and he ended up in hell. And that's where Malbolgia recruited him to be a hellspawn. Again, that same old deal that Malbolgia is so often fond of giving, right? Like, I will restore you to life. Whatever that means, life as a hellspawn. But I'll restore you back to, the earth, and you can have your revenge and what have you. So now that all the pieces are in place, the queens basically say, yeah, now you can go your own way because we're going to rule the earth. We're going to consume it. And they ask Starling to join them. Like, hey, with the power of the Witchblade, you've been tricked and what have you, but you can join us and be rule alongside us, basically, which we know that's not true, right? Riel and these other aspects of her are only trying to get Starling to not fight against them, because they figure if they can do that, at some point they'll be able to take the power of the Witchblade for themselves. Because right now it's bonded with Starling, and they wouldn't be able to remove it. But she's not fooled for a second. Starling's not fooled for a second. She attacks, and we have her going up against the three different aspects of Riel, of the Evil Queen, and we have the Scourge and Lieth fighting against each other. A battle long in the making, as it were. So interesting art here, a little esoteric. Again, you can see the digital influences, digital painting from Brian Haberlin. And as they're fighting, the queens kind of meld together and achieve their final form, as it were. And it's pretty terrifying. It's pretty frightening. You wonder, with the way it looks on that full-page spread, are they even really female? You know, I guess they are, but, man, they just look horrifying. They just look awful. And so, yeah, it looks like it's going to be a pretty tough battle. Even it doesn't appear that the Witchblade is going to be able to stand up to it, although we see Starling trying. She's sending out the vines. It's interesting. Later on, the Witchblade that most of us know, Sarah Pizzini, it's more of these like dark threads or what have you. Here, medieval times, maybe it's an aspect of Starling having spent so much time in the forest as a child, but they look like these vines with a bunch of thorns and what have you. So they're doing their best to fight, but they're vastly outnumbered. They know they're going to lose, and they're trying to figure out how they can possibly win. And again, the queens are giving them a chance to join them, especially Starling. You can't win. Our followers are legion. You slay one, another takes its place. And Starling appeals to the hellspawn, saying, Lieth, whatever you're calling yourself, you know, you've been battling the queens, and I've been battling her minions. It's time to switch. It's time to switch because this is not working. And maybe it's that Starling senses how much power there actually is in the Witchblade. But she's actually able to hurt this giant Voltron monster of the queens, which is kind of surprising when she unleashes the full power of the Witchblade. But still, it doesn't really seem to be enough. You know, it damages her, it wounds her, and she's got this hole in her. But she says, "Oh, that was impressive, but give us more." Right? Like she's standing there with the hole in her. But it's not enough, and the squire is worried that they're gonna lose. All their fighting is going to be for nothing, and Spawn is ready to give up, saying this is beyond my powers, and the squire refines his faith, basically, in the midst of this battle. Right? He's always believed, even though this isn't the king that he thought it was, King Valen, he believes he's seen what medieval Spawn has done. He's seen him fight all these battles. He says, the demon who made you and sent you back said he gave you the power to make amends. So, you know, don't give up. You've got to try. And medieval Spawn says, yes, Malbolgia, he did remake me. And if I could, you know, he remade me out of necroplasm. And if I could unleash all the necroplasm that shapes me, if I could, you know, tear my body apart, sacrifice myself so that the earth would live, I would do it. And that's what he does. He like opens his chest up, and the necroplasm that makes up who he is bursts forth, and finally that is able to destroy, or at least vanquish, send somewhere else perhaps, these three queens. But it has expended all the energy that Lieth had, and the Scourge as well. He turns back into King Valen at the last minute and finally knows peace. But for Spawn, he's going to die. But what's interesting is Seahawk says, well, his wounds are grave, but his fate was to find redemption. Now, once he does, the deal he made with Malbolgia, once he finds redemption, he's going to be sent back. He's going to be sent back to hell. And so they decide, Seahawk decides, we're going to send him far into the future where there is no Malbolgia, and then the deal that he made is kind of null and void, right? So that's what they do with the power of the Witchblade and the power of Seahawk. They kind of team up. Seahawk takes the Witchblade in his hands, although Starling's still wearing it, and they send the body, or they send medieval Spawn into the future, and that's where we find out, and we see Malbolgia screaming there at the bottom, no, he lost his prize. He made a deal to give the power to Lieth so that he could have his redemption. He had his redemption. Now he doesn't have to serve Malbolgia. He's been sent into the future. So then Seahawk and the Squire and Starling are talking about, hey, do you think he made it? Do you think he's safe? And the Squire says, well, I believe in justice. Yes, he did wrong things, but he paid for his sin, and he seemed to be a decent person. I hope he's right. And so then Seahawk turns to Starling and says, okay, now that you've seen the power of the Witchblade and you've seen what I do, will you join us? Will you become one of the trusted? And she's not about that, right? She's too used to being on her own, having her own freedom. So if you need help, you can call on me, but I'm not joining your roving band of warriors. I'm going to go and try to learn about the women that I've been descended from. And Seahawk says, hey, I respect your choice. You seem wise beyond your years, and wishes her the best. So we find out that this story has been told by this Squire years and years later. And so they ask him to tell more stories, like what happened to the hellspawn. And Owen, I think I've called him the Squire throughout. His name's Owen. They said, tell us more stories. He says, another time I may tell you some more stories. And then we flash back to the future, like we did right at the beginning of this issue, and we see Kildare, we see Adam, and we see that the hellspawn appears. He's got that pendant, and apparently that's some sort of elemental dark forces that were brought with them. So I don't know if that's like a story point or what have you. But they are able to vanquish that, and medieval Spawn has made it to the future, and he asks, what is this place? And they say, hey, it's a long story. We got a lot of time to tell you. And as they're kind of helping him to his feet, he screams out, saying that his face feels like it's on fire. It feels like it's melting. And when he takes his helm off, we see that he's restored. And he says, the demon Malbolgia likes his servants as repulsive am I. I'm sure I look hideous. And Kildare says, no, not repulsive at all. You're born again because Malbolgia's gone. You have no master. Whether you choose to be good or evil from this moment on is all up to you. And that's how the story ends. So very interesting. Again, based on where we are and what I've read of Spawn, I don't know if we see more of Lieth at some point. Now that there is no Malbolgia in the future where he is, does that mean he doesn't have any power? I mean, we see that he's restored. Does that mean he doesn't have the powers of the hellspawn anymore? Or does he? Obviously, this isn't the same medieval Spawn that we've seen in the past, that being Sir John. Medieval times did last a long time, so, there's every chance there could be more than one medieval Spawn at some point. But again, just don't know who Lieth is, what his future holds. It could have been a case where maybe the Bryans had plans for more. If this sold well, I'm just not sure. But in terms of just evaluating the story for what it was, it is enjoyable. It's much more layered and complex than the first medieval Spawn Witchblade series, which I talked about a couple days ago, and I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that this was so much more layered. Interesting characters. As much as it is layered, and the complexity comes in the characters and their motivations, and a little bit of a plot twist, right? Like all along, we thought that medieval Spawn was King Valen, and it turns out it's Lieth. There's betrayal, a little bit of misandry and misogyny with the whole gender conflicts and what have you. So a little cliched here or there. And first issue focused on medieval Spawn, but we didn't get a lot of character other than he's kind of mysterious. Then the second issue really focuses on Seahawk and sort of the Witchblade aspect of the story. And then 3 and 4 kind of bring it all together. So again, a complex story in terms of characters and that plot twist, and more layers. Nobody's out and out good, nobody's out and out bad. We're not at the extremes. Again, with the more simplistic characters like we had in the first Spawn Witchblade. But as far as the story itself, that it is pretty simple, right? Like, and I won't say cliched, but sort of classic, right? Like this idea of king being bewitched, and being killed, betrayed, and then his land being besieged by darkness. And there's an evil sorcerer, evil magic user. It's very typical. And then we have a knight in shining armor, in this case medieval Spawn, ride in and save the day, and puts together a band of warriors. Obviously we have Seahawk and Starling joining him to do that. So yeah, sort of these classic fantasy stories that really work. And so all in all, it was enjoyable and an entertaining read. And I think the art, although again it has that kind of slickness to it and lacks a little bit of texture that I think if it was done in a more traditional fashion it might have, it still works, and it's very strong storytelling, especially like the emotion in the faces that were given, and it's not, even though it tends to be kind of a darker or drearier story in terms of color, it's not muddy at all because it is done digitally, and you can do a fantastic job with shadows and that sort of thing when it's digitally painted. But one of the things about it, other than getting a little bit of kind of Malbolgia lore at the end in this final issue, there's not a lot of the Spawn lore in this. And because it is an ensemble piece, we don't even get a lot of medieval Spawn, Lieth, because he again, we're not even sure who he is. He's not sure who he is. He thinks he's another character, for the first part of the story. So even what some of the characterization we think we're getting is not even accurate characterization. So I do wish it tied into the mythos of Spawn a little bit more, and we got a little bit more of Lieth maybe. But I just don't know that there was room, right? If this was the story that they wanted to tell, then there just, again, wasn't room. But it feels like you could swap out medieval Spawn for any character, any just, insert random fantasy character, and it still works. So I kind of wish it was more dependent on the Spawn mythos and the Spawn lore. It would feel more connected to the Spawn universe. But that's a minor nitpick. Overall, it's really enjoyable, great art, like I said. So that's going to do it for this episode. Next issue, we're going to be talking about Spawn, or next episode, I should say. We're going to be talking about Spawn Wildcats, written by Alan Moore. Definitely a very interesting story, I'll say. Make it a little smaller to see the whole thing there. Alan Moore writing Spawn and the Wildcats. Yeah, it happened. It happened in the 90s. So that's what we'll be talking about on the next episode. So we appreciate everybody joining us, as always. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't for you guys joining us to check out these issues. And we appreciate the comments. We appreciate all the subscribers. So be sure you head over to YouTube, or if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe, ring the notification bell. We're really trying to get to 500 subscribers so I can monetize some of these, maybe offset some of the costs of all the coverage. It's not cheap to produce podcasts and have your own website and whatnot these days. And I've never charged, and I never will. But if I could get a little ad revenue from YouTube, that would be fantastic. So just trying to hit that 500 subscriber mark. So tell your friends, tell your fellow comic readers, maybe they'd like to check it out. And if you are checking us out on YouTube and you want to go back and listen to previous audio-only content, just go to wherever you get your podcast, whatever platform or podcast app you use, and subscribe. There are literally thousands of past episodes of interviews, comic reviews, convention coverage, all of that. So we appreciate the support, as always. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and we will talk to you next time.